So would you rather live under the sea or in outer space? Well, that's a question our next guest doesn't have to choose between because he's done both. Dr. Dave Williams holds the Canadian record for spacewalking, 17 hours and 47 minutes, in case you were wondering. He's also the first Canadian to live and work on the world's only undersea research habitat. You could say he spent his entire life defying limits, and now he's sharing lessons learned from the edge of the universe in this new book. The astronaut, aquanaut, jet pilot, ER doctor, CEO, and author is back in our studios this morning. Dr. Dave Williams, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Your book makes the reader believe that they can be an astronaut. And I did. I swear, after I read the book, I Googled how to become an astronaut and can I apply? And then I remembered I'm not actually an ER doctor or an astrophysicist or an aquanaut.
But that's okay.
One beautiful lesson you teach is about not being afraid to fail.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the lessons I wanted to share in the book is about resilience. I've had many significant failures in my life. What I learned from those failures is what you do when you don't succeed determines whether you will succeed.
And you talk about some major failings of your own in the book.
Yeah.
One notable one that you didn't get into medical school the first time.
No, I didn't. In fact, the second time when I got in, my marks were on the lower side of the continuum and things, but I had worked really, really hard in graduate school. I had to overcome some challenges there. When I got into medical school, I really killed myself working very, very hard. And when I graduated, I won the Wood Gold Medal for graduating at the top of the class. So it was an amazing journey.
There are a lot of people who I think, had they not got in the first time, they would have said, okay, time for a new dream, but you persevered. And I believe that perseverance really came from the lessons your parents taught you.
I was really lucky when I was a kid. You know, my parents, I think, were quite courageous to let my sister and I do the things that we were doing. We're outside all the time experimenting, trying to fly airplanes and working with little small gas engines and jet engines
like
and things.
Rockets?
Like rockets, yeah. It was unbelievable. And, you know, we didn't really have a high degree of parental supervision, so to speak. So fires were occasional episodes that we had to learn to contain.
And put out, as you write in the book, before Mom came outside.
Yes, that's very important, actually.
So from there, you had an incredible childhood. You go to medical school, and then you begin your astronaut training. And one of the things that you get to experience is something called the Vomit Comet.
Vomit Comet is kind of the ride of a lifetime. It's an airplane that you get into, and when they fly along, they pull the nose of the airplane up 45 degrees, climb 10,000 feet, push the nose forward so you're in a 45-degree dive, falling out of the sky, and inside the airplane, you're floating around like you would be in space. You have 20 seconds of microgravity where you're essentially floating around.
And the way you described the plane, Dave, that it had the faint scent of vomit in it as well, because you don't just do this one time, you do it multiple times through the trip.
You do. So inevitably, somebody gets sick over the course of the 40 parabolas. And you notice when you're in an environment like that, it becomes contagious. One person throws up, all of a sudden 2 or 3 people, and then, needless to say, the plane takes on an olfactory aura all of its own.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So good. But I imagine that's part of the lesson, is learning how to deal with something like if you happen to throw up while you're on a plane and you have to continue on. That is part of your training to become an astronaut, dealing with what happens.
Oh, there's no question. Overcoming adversity is part of what we have to do. In fact, when we're in space, whatever problem happens, we have to solve the problem and move on to be able to achieve mission objectives. So whatever it is that you're dealing with, on my last spacewalk, Clay Anderson and I were outside, the fire alarm for the space station goes off. So we look at each other and say, well, we're outside. And then, of course, a couple minutes later, it was a false alarm, so none of us really had to worry too much. But you just keep working through all these various challenges that you face.
Speaking of challenges that you faced, you spoke about, or you write about your underwater mission, and Nemo 1, I believe it's called. And in your underwater mission, you tell this wonderful story about involving a hairdryer, and it created a little bit of a problem for you guys.
Oh yeah, the hairdryer. Well, anyway, when you come in from being outside and you're living underwater, you have to dry your ears to make sure you don't get an ear infection. So we used an hairdryer to do that. And one of the crew was using the hairdryer, and unfortunately, we had a pyrolytic event. In other words, a fire. Now, there wasn't actually flame. There was just a whole lot of smoke, but that's enough to set off the smoke alarms and the fire detectors. So that was a bit of a major event. And interestingly, the next day, they were planning on having a simulated emergency for us, but we created our own, so we didn't actually have to have that as part of our training.
Yeah, and you had fabulous hair at the end of it.
Looking good.
Talk to me about a little bit about Nemo 1. What was it like going, because you'd already been to space at that point, and then you went underwater. What was that like to experience two very different, I guess, elevations? I don't even know how to, one's way up here, one's way down here. What was the experience like for you and for your body, and how did they seem similar?
Living in space, you have an incredible view of our planet where you're looking at this beautiful blue oasis in space, no boundaries separating countries or anything. But living underwater, you look up at the surface, which is only 60 feet away, and you realize if I go there, I'm dead. And you have neighbors underwater. The fish become your neighbors. It's an incredible experience. And of course, my first mission underwater, I got to meet Joe McGinnis, Canada's famous diving doctor, underwater. It was incredible.
That's amazing. Dave, you've gone through several journeys, and one of them included battling prostate cancer. And there's a quote that you write in the book where you say, take a deep breath before this one. You say, "Nobody wants to be a member of the Cancer Club. But for those of us who do join it, I suspect we all have the exact same first thought: I'm going to die." When I heard those words, "You have prostate cancer," I didn't hear them as a doctor or as an astronaut. I was just a scared human being who felt like he'd been handed a death sentence. From there, where do you go?
I fortunately learned the lesson early on in my career. It's what you do in those moments that determines the outcome. So after 24 hours of going through all those emotions and everything that you just read about, I said, I've got to get my act together and I've got to learn about this. So I took on the approach that I would if I was treating a patient who had prostate cancer. I went and reread the medical literature. I'm an emergency trauma physician, not a urologist. So I read the medical literature. I found myself an incredible physician. We talked about the best possible approach to taking care of this surgically. In those days, I used an open radical procedure. And fortunately, now, touch wood, I can say I'm a surgical cure. When I flew in space on my second space flight, I flew as a cancer survivor.
Dave, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
It's
Thanks
a real
so much.
pleasure.